You're listening to the Daily Mishnah Podcast with Benedict.
So we're just about to begin the tractate of Shabbat and the order of Moed. I think we've spoken before about the fact that the individual tractates are arranged within the order in descending order of the number of chapters. So we are now going to work down from Shabbat, which has a frightening 22 chapters, even though some of them are very short. One of them only has 2 Mishnayot. We're going to work down from Shabbat with 22 chapters to Chagiga at the end, which only has 3 chapters. That's essentially how the tractates are laid out within the order. And maybe that's how they used to keep track of them in their heads before the time when the Mishnah was written down. And the Mishnah of Shabbat begins with a halacha which is not obvious. Yitziot HaShabbat shtaim shehen arba bifnim ushtaim shehen arba bachutz. The carryings out of Shabbat are 2 which are 4 from the inside and 2 which are 4 from the outside. So the Mishnah is going to start talking about carrying. Now, this is the first chapter. When we get into the 7th chapter, we will learn a list of 39 activities which are forbidden on Shabbat, and these are derived from the activities of building the temple. These are all creative acts like sowing, reaping, writing 2 letters, rubbing out 2 letters in order to write, and so on. They're well-known creative activities that you need to build something. And it's not at all obvious that carrying from inside to outside should be one of those activities at all. Indeed, when we go into the 7th chapter and we look at this list, we will see that the act of carrying, the act of passing from the public to the private domain or vice versa, is actually the very last in the list. But there is a verse for it. There's one which the Bartanura quotes. This comes right after the Exodus from Egypt, by the way. The Shabbat is the first mitzvah given after the people cross the Red Sea. They cross the sea, they complain. What are they given? Well, they're given the manna, and they're given the mitzvah of Shabbat. And there the text says, Ru'u ki Hashem natan lachem et Shabbat. God's given you the Shabbat, and He's given you on the 6th day double portion. That means double portion of manna. And then, Shavu ish tachtav, everybody stay in their place. Al yetzeh ish mimkomo b'yom hashavi. You don't move out of your space on the 7th day. So that's one verse that we could use just to tie down this rather amorphous melacha, this work activity of carrying in and out. And we can also tie it down, by the way, to building the temple. And I think the Rambam brings this verse, right at it will be in Vayakel or in Vayakel. Everyone is collecting the materials everyone is collecting the materials for the sanctuary, and at a certain point, Moshe proclaims that there's enough. Vayetzav Moshe, vayiveru kol babachon. He makes an announcement, and he says, "Ish ve'isha al yasu od malacha." Don't do any more work. Li trumat hakodesh. He uses the word malacha for work. Ve yikalei ha'am mehavi. And the people stopped bringing. Bringing is associated with malacha, with work, with creative activity. So perhaps this is the hook. I mean, the Rambam has a very keen reader of text, right? Maybe this is the hook on which we can hook the 39th malacha. I don't know. One way or the other, it is the most obscure of the 39 malachot. And maybe as a result of that, many chapters of the Mishnah are taken up with it. All the way from chapter 7 to chapter 11 is going to be taken up with issues of carrying. And it is the subject of the first Mishnah in the Masechet. So as we've said, there are There are 2 carryings which are 4, and 2 which are 4. How does it work? So there's a poor man standing outside and the householder standing inside. Interesting, by the way, that this prohibition is cast in terms of a mitzvah. Clearly, it's a mitzvah for the householder to give the poor man a something. And yet, we're going to say, okay, it is a mitzvah to give him something, but on Shabbat, even though it's a mitzvah, it's a problem on Shabbat. And then the Mishnah outlines different possibilities. So, Pashat He'anita Yodol Ifnim. So maybe the poor man reaches his hand inside and gives something to the householder. Or he reaches his hand inside and he takes from inside and carries out. Either way, the poor man, the poor person moves from public to private or from private to public. His hand does the moving. And the Mishnah declares chayav. He'ani chayav uval habayit patur. The poor man, the one who did the moving, is liable. That means liable to a sin offering. And the householder is exempt. Bal habayit patur. What about the mirror image? Well, we can imagine the mirror image is going to be a mirror image. Pashat bal habayit et yado lachutz. Maybe the householder reaches his hand out and places it in the poor man's hand, or takes from it and carries it in. And in this case, bal habayit chayav, the householder has to bring a sin offering, vehani patur, because the householder has done the action. So the first 2 cases, and these are the first 2 cases of the Mishnah, they're pretty clear. Now, let's try with an action which is shared. Pashat he'ani et yado lifnim, the poor person puts his hand inside. Ve natal bal habayit mitucha, and the householder takes from it. So the poor man's reached inside, and the householder takes from it. So between the 2 of them, they've achieved the same object. They've brought from the public to the private. But they've done it together. And it works in reverse, by the way. Or shinatan l'tucha. Maybe the householder puts something in his hand and then he draws his hand back. But the result is the same. They've achieved this act together. And the Mishnah concludes, Shnehem puturin. That means they're exempt, by the way, from sin offering. The Mishnah is not suggesting that the act is permitted, but they're exempt from a sin offering, because when 2 people participate together in an act, neither one of them is absolutely guilty. And similarly, and this is the mirror image, Pashat bal habayit et yado lachutz, the householder sticks his hand outside, v'natal he'ani mitucha, and the mitucha, the poor person takes from it. Or the reverse, that the or the reverse, and the poor man places in it, and he carries it inside. Shnehem puturim. They are both exempt from the sin offering. So this first Mishnah is learning, if you like. I mean, it's learning a distinction, a particular distinction on the act of carrying. I mean, it begins with if you like, the most obscure of the malachot, the act of carrying in and out, and then it learns almost a technical distinction that a single person has to be responsible for the act in order to be liable for a sin offering. As if the Mishnah is constructing a fence around the halacha. And we'll see in the next 2 Mishnayot, which deal with different subjects, that we still seem to be constructing a fence around the halacha. We seem to be defining the edges of Shabbat observance in a way that removes any possibility of we're defining the edges of observance. The next Mishnah is not Shabbat observance, actually. That's very interesting. We're defining the edges of behavior in a way that we shouldn't transgress. So the next Mishnah, we're in the Mishnah of Shabbat, but actually we're not talking about Shabbat. we're talking about timekeeping. So the same kind of time issues we're aware of on Friday afternoon, but this actually might apply in any afternoon. You can't sit down to have your hair done after the mincha time. This is probably 6.5 hours after the morning. In other words, halfway through the day. One can't sit down to have one's hair down near mincha until one's prayed the tefillah. And similarly, you shouldn't enter the baths or a tannery or to eat or to judge. In other words, one shouldn't start an extended process without taking time for tefillah. But if they began, they need not break off. And then the Mishnah closes mafsikim likrot kriyat shema. Obviously, you're going to break off for kriyat shema because that's a time-bound mitzvah. It's time-specific. Ve'ein mafsikim latefillah. Probably because you require kavanah for tefillah. I mean, it's less time-bound anyway. It's less time-bound, but you need kavanah for tefillah. I think that is probably the reason. And now we're going to move from time on a general afternoon to time on a Friday afternoon. Yeah, it's the same language. Lo yeshev adam lifnei hasaparim samuch lamincha. One shouldn't sit before a barber before mincha. And now, lo yitzeh hachayat b'machto samuch lachashecha. One shouldn't, a tailor mustn't go out with his needle. We're back to going in and going out and carrying near nightfall, lest he forget it, nor a scribe with his quill. And now, so we're back to carrying, but now we're going to just get into more general issues. You shouldn't search your garments. This is for lice, actually. You shouldn't read. These are all things that require a bright light. And we might be tempted to adjust the light. You see, we're circling round the edges of correct behavior. You're not breaking Shabbat by using a light to look for lice or to read, but we don't do it in case we might need a brighter light. And then the Mishnah concludes, in truth it was said, the Chazan can see where the children are reading from, because he's not going to be tempted to adjust the light for them. Aval hu lo yikra, but he doesn't read. Kayot said, but it goes on the same basis. Similarly, lo yochal hazav im hazava mipnei hergel havera. Similarly, a zav shouldn't eat with a zava because familiarity kind of leads to sin. So generally, you wouldn't eat with a zava because she will make the food tameh. And if you're a woman, you wouldn't eat with a zav because he would make your food tameh. Now, a zav and a zava, they're both tmeim, right? They can eat together perfectly well. There's no reason why they shouldn't eat together. But maybe if they get in the habit of eating together, they will relax on this prohibition of not eating with a zav or not eating with a zava. So to summarize, we're circling around the edges of what is permitted and what is not permitted, and we are building a fence around the Torah, and we will continue looking at these kinds of examples in the Mishnayot, which follow as we pick these up from day to day.
Thank you for listening to this edition of the Daily Mishnah Podcast with Benedict.